Innovative Devices function. I will be taking you through the first part of today's webinar. Next slide, please. On our agenda today, we have the overview of the status of the future medical device regulatory regime, which I will go through. Then we have the update on the changing scope of the future regulations. General medical devices will be covered by Claire Thompson. In vitro diagnostic devices will be covered by Joseph Burt. Software as a medical device will be covered by Paul Campbell. Update on amendments to device classification for general medical devices will be covered by Claire again. In vitro diagnostic devices again by Joseph Burt, and software as a medical device will be covered by Paul Campbell. And then we have an update on essential requirements. The general update will be covered by Jenny Keating, and the information to be provided with the device will be covered by Christina Santirso Margaretto. Following this, we will have a Q&A session. I do need to note that the Q&A session will be specifically on topics that are covered in this webinar. Unfortunately, we can't go beyond any of the content of this webinar. Next slide, please. Right, let's begin with a brief overview of the regulatory landscape and where we are now. Next slide, please. Our vision in the MHRA is to be a truly world-leading, enabling sovereign regulator, protecting public health through excellence in regulation and science, and delivering the right outcomes for patients. Next slide, please. In order to achieve this, we're working hard to deliver a world-leading regulatory framework for medical devices in the UK that prioritises patient and public safety. The changes that we put in place will improve the safety of medical devices and IVDs for the public and keep patients safe. It will promote greater transparency of regulatory decision-making and medical device information. Close alignment with international best practice will support both patient safety and the MHRA's plans for international recognition of medical devices. Ultimately, we will generate a more flexible, responsive and proportionate regulation that better serves the UK population. Next slide, please. In September 2021, the MHRA held a public consultation to understand your views. We asked questions on all areas of the regulation and collected responses from a wide range of stakeholder groups, from device manufacturers to doctors and patients. If you would like to learn more about the outcomes of this consultation, we published a response in June 2022, which can be found at the link above, and details how we intend to put what you have said into practice to deliver a robust, pragmatic regulation that keeps patients safe. The consultation response indicated that you wanted to see improvements to patient safety and greater access to high quality, safe and effective medical devices. It highlighted the need to strengthen post-market surveillance requirements in line with changes in the EU and ensure better incident reporting and surveillance. There was strong support for the MHRA to introduce measures to improve the traceability of medical devices, including through the use of UDI. And finally, there was support for the introduction of international recognition routes that avoid duplication and minimise the burden on industry. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like to go through what we've delivered to date. Since the publication of the consultation response document, the MHRA has been dedicated to the implementation of this complex regulatory change. We have extended the acceptance of CE marked medical devices until 2030 in some instances, in order to mitigate the supply risk that threatened as a result of Britain's exit from the EU, and are delivering new regulation and post-market surveillance. Here you can see some of the things that we have achieved to deliver the improvements to medical device regulation that you have asked for. For example, the Software and AI as a Medical Device Change Programme an ambitious programme of reform to ensure that medical device regulation is fit for purpose for software, including artificial intelligence, or AI. We also launched a new regulatory pathway to support safe patient access to innovative medical technologies. The Innovative Devices Access Pathway, also known as IDAP. The IDAP pilot scheme opened to applications from commercial and non-commercial developers from the UK and international markets last year. Just this month, we have announced the 8 innovative products that were selected for this pilot programme as part of a competitive process run jointly by the MHRA, the Department of Health and Social Care, NICE and the NHS bodies. Next slide, please. We also published at the end of last year our roadmap. Delivering new regulations is a long process that requires that we ensure what we put in place that will work for the UK, not just now, but in future, such that it will be able to keep up with technological advances. The MHRA acknowledges that it's important to keep you, our stakeholders, appraised of these developments, and as such, we released our regulatory roadmap, which can be found at the link below. The roadmap sets out new plans to protect patient safety and enable access without delay for UK patients to innovative medical technologies. It is designed to deliver greater international harmonisation with more patient-centred, proportionate requirements for medical devices, which are responsive to technological advances. It will provide clarity so that you are aware of what is planned when new legislation will be introduced. We have been engaging with stakeholders across the regulatory landscape to support delivery of the new regulations, and we will continue to do so throughout 2024. We will introduce more stringent post-market surveillance measures this year, bringing in the most crucial amendments to the UK MDR that will benefit patients and keep them safe. We have been working to update the entirety of the UK medical device regulation with the aim that the core elements of this regime will apply from 2025. We will continue to conduct stakeholder engagement to ensure the measures we put in are both proportionate and realistic. To manage the scale of change, we are implementing these changes through a series of statutory instruments, also known as SIs. As you can see from the roadmap, there are a minimum of 3 major statutory instruments scheduled to be laid in the next number of years. In determining the content of these SIs, we have prioritised patient safety. Next slide, please. The upcoming SIs. The first SI on post-market surveillance will bring forward improvements to proactive safety monitoring. It will provide us with flexibility for policies that come later, ensuring that procedures are in place to keep patients safe. The new PMS requirements will lay the groundwork for international recognition of medical devices and ensure that all devices entering the GB market are subject to robust PMS requirements. It will put measures in place to ensure higher risk devices on the UK market are subject to additional post-market surveillance. Enhancements in post-market surveillance provide us with building blocks for areas such as innovative pathways and international recognition. There will be a second SI covering the core elements of the new regime and a third one covering enhancements to the new regime. For further information on these SI, please refer to gov.uk. Next slide, please. So where are we now? Well, we have conducted extensive consultation and engagement with stakeholders to develop this policy for the core framework, which is now in the process of being drafted into secondary legislation. Once completed, early sight of the draft regulation will be provided through the World Trade Organization notification, after which the statutory instrument will be laid in Parliament. Once debated in Parliament, the statutory instrument will be signed into the statute book, coming into force a minimum of 6 months after this. Next slide, please. The purpose of the session. So why are you here? The purpose of today's session is to share further details on MHRA draft policy regarding scope, classification, and the essential requirements for medical devices, and to answer any questions you may have on this. This will help us to understand where further guidance and support is needed to implement these changes and improve patient safety for the UK. I will now hand over to Claire, who will cover the next section of the presentation.
Hello there, thank you Eve, and good morning all. So today myself and colleagues will be covering the upcoming changes to the scope of the medical device regulations. Next slide please. So following the 2021 consultation, the MHRA indicated that we would amend the scope of the UK medical device regulations in order to account for advances in medicine, engineering, technology, and in clinical practice, including advances within diagnostics and wellness products and certain products without a medical intended purpose. So our aim of this is to improve patient safety by providing greater assurance about the performance and safety of devices, including those with a similar patient risk profile to medical devices, but which have no intended medical purpose. We also intend to increase alignment across international frameworks for medical device and IVD regulations. And to achieve this, we'll be updating the definitions of what constitutes a medical device. Next slide, please. So for general medical devices, the changes that we introduce will mean that the new regulations will now cover products that are specifically intended for cleaning, disinfection, or sterilization of devices, products that are for prediction or prognosis of disease, products that support conception, and products that are used for investigation, replacement, or modification of a pathological process, and also for products which provide information by means of an in vitro examination of specimens derived from the human body, which includes organ, blood, and tissue donations. We also plan to update the language which we use in this definition to be more inclusive, referring to disability rather than handicap, and will also include a specific reference to intended purpose of the medical device within this definition in order to ensure that patients are better protected. Next slide, please. So linked to this, we'll also be introducing updates to the definition of intended purpose. Now, the agency consulted on clarifying how intended purpose is interpreted and how we could bring it more into line with other jurisdictions. There was strong support from the consultation responses that the definition of intended purpose should be updated to include that it must be construed objectively, and that this should be reflected in the information that's applied with the device, in the promotional sales material, and in the technical documentation or materials, such as clinical evaluation of the medical device. Next slide, please. In terms of what this will achieve, well, this amendment will require that manufacturers consider the device's intended purpose from the standpoint of an objective observer, whether that be a layperson or a professional user. And in line with this, it will ensure that the intended purpose of the device is described in appropriate language for those intended users. Paired with new legislation on claims, it will also make clear that the presentations made in a manufacturer's promotional and marketing material must be consistent with the evidence underpinning their device. This will now provide clarity for device users on how and when a device can be used according to its intended purpose. It will reduce the risk to patient safety associated with potential misuse or with off-label use, so that it's clear to the user that what the device has undergone appropriate conformity assessment for, and that appropriate clinical evidence has been provided for the purpose that it will be used for. So I'll now pass to Joseph Burt, our Head of Diagnostics.
Thanks, Claire. Hello, my name is Joseph Burt. I'm the Head of Diagnostics with the MHRA. There was agreement to expand the definition of an IVD diagnostic device following on from responses to Section 1 of the consultation on the future regulations of medical devices in the UK. The current IVD definition will be modified, as you can see on the screen, and will include software moving forward. It will also incorporate IVD devices for the examination of specimens that provide information for physical and mental impairment, for providing information concerning the predisposition of a medical condition or disease, and for information to predict treatment responses and reactions. These three additions will be included as an update to the current definition of an IVD device, as you can read on the screen here. I will now pass over to Paul Campbell to describe software as a medical device. Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Joseph, and thanks, Claire. So moving on to software as a medical device, you will see in the consultation we stated we intended to provide a definition for software as a medical device. The intention there is the definition in red, a set of instructions that process input data and creates output data. So colleagues, members will appreciate that's a broad definition, and the reason we have this breadth of definition is to ensure we've got the greatest opportunity to protect the quality, safety of patients and the public. We also intend to make sure that this definition allows us the flexibility to be proportionate with the discussions about qualification. And another point of note on software is that, as has been previously stated, these regulations are for a definition of software as a medical device, and we consider that artificial intelligence is a subset of that software. So this is a definition that will cover all, both software and artificial intelligence under it. Thank you. Next slide, please. Slightly busier slide, this one. This is about the pre-market essential requirements. Again, these are very well linked to the, the consultation document. The intention here is to follow and to be akin to this, as was stated, the GSPR regulations and the EU MDR. So that's the intention, so that we're internationally aligned with that. And this, for those with a keen eye, what you'll notice, looks very like the point 17 in the GSPR. So you'll see, looking through this, this is aimed at looking at reliability, performance, risk management, and specifically supporting the life cycle of the product. One really important feature there at the bottom is the specific call out on minimum IT security standards and hardware. That's specifically also going to cover us for cyber security. So there's a list there. Hopefully colleagues can see that, and this is also in the consultation document. The last thing I would note on software is that we intend on a voluntary basis to introduce predetermined change control plans. I'm sure people can appreciate the nature of software and its ability to change frequently, and we believe, in fact, many partners around the world believe that predetermined change control plans is a mechanism to allow software to handle itself through its life cycle. So these will be introduced on a voluntary basis, and there will be guidance alongside that. In fact, there will be guidance for each of these items on software, on AI, and on predetermined change control plans. So that's where I've got to in software. I think I'm handing back to Claire. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. So to end this segment on regulatory scope, I'm going to touch briefly on devices without a medical purpose. So this includes devices with a similar patient risk profile to medical devices, but that have no intended medical purpose, particularly cosmetic products such as dermal fillers and coloured contact lenses. There was strong support in the consultation for additional regulation of these devices, which if used for a cosmetic purpose, are not actually subject to the same stringent requirements as if they were used in a medical procedure. Now, this is a highly active policy area at present, with the Department of Health recently holding a consultation in this area on licensing of non-surgical cosmetic procedures. Moreover, the first CE-marked cosmetic filler was only approved for use on the EU market in November 2023. As such, we will be introducing these measures, but they will come in within the future enhancements SI after introduction of the core framework, in order to enable MHRA to consult further with stakeholders and ensure that a strong foundation is in place to support compliance. So that concludes our section relating to regulatory scope. So I'll now proceed to talk about general medical device classification. Next slide, please. Brilliant. Thank you. So medical devices in the UK, as you must be aware, are regulated under the Medical Devices Regulations 2002. For general medical devices, these regulations enact into UK law the European Union Medical Devices Directives. Excuse me. General medical devices are classified depending on the level of risk that they represent to the user. Active implantable medical devices are considered the highest risk classification, and they undergo extensive conformity assessments by UK approved bodies. The manufacturer needs to provide evidence that the device they place on the UK market is safe and performs as intended. This is achieved by undergoing a conformity assessment process, the stringency and complexity of which is based on the device classification. Next slide, please. So medical devices are classified into 4 categories based on this risk profile. Class 1 represents the lowest risk, while Class 3 represents the highest risk. The classification system aims to control risk and ensure safety based on device complexity and the potential harm to patients. Some examples of Class 1 products include wheelchairs, stethoscopes, and tongue depressors, while for Class 3, you're looking at devices such as cardiac pacemakers and breast implants. The level of regulatory oversight and requirements increases with the higher classification. Most Class 1 devices need only undergo self-declaration with additional requirements if they're sterile or have a measuring function, while Class 2 to 3 undergo assessment by a UK-approved body. For the highest risk products, a more comprehensive conformity assessment process is adhered to. Manufacturers need to provide technical files, quality system certificates, labelling, clinical evaluation reports, and more in order to demonstrate that they're compliant with the regulations before they are permitted to put a conformity mark on their product and make it available to users. Next slide, please. So why are we changing the general medical device classification? Well, by amending the UK MDR, the MHRA aims to ensure that medical device classification better reflects the changes in technology and better accounts for how medical devices are used in a modern world, including the level of invasiveness and potential toxicity of certain devices. The changes that we make to the device classification system will ensure that the scrutiny that a medical device receives is commensurate with the level of risk that the device represents, and it will ensure the safety of devices for users in the UK. Greater alignment with best international practice will support our upcoming plans for international recognition, and it will deliver improved access to innovative products. We'll also promote the UK as a favourable place to research, develop and manufacture devices and support responsible innovation in digital health. Next slide, please. So how are we going to achieve this? Well, these objectives will be achieved by improving the clarity of the existing classification rules, updating definitions to align to international definitions and definitions within the EU MDR, while removing ambiguity across the rules to make it easier for manufacturers to identify the correct classification for their device. These classification rules are going to be based on intended purpose, risk potential, and technical and biological characteristics of the device. Devices considered to represent a greater risk to patient safety may be classified into a higher risk class, and this will ensure greater scrutiny before market approval. In addition, we'll also be introducing new rules for standalone software, which will now be explicitly classified. Next slide, please. So within the classification rules, there are several categories. Devices are either non-invasive or invasive, and different rules will apply when these are considered surgically or non-surgically invasive. Active devices fall within their own rule set, and we have expanded this rule set to include active implantable devices, which will continue to be classified as Class 3. We've also expanded the special rule set, and this will capture developing technologies such as nanomaterials, and it will also ensure that devices that utilize these types of technologies are classified in line with the risks that they represent. So we'll now look a bit more closely at each of these areas and the changes that will be implemented. Next slide, please. So for non-invasive devices, non-invasive medical devices which come into contact with mucous membrane, not only injured skin, will be classified between Class 1 and Class 2A. And these changes will ensure that the devices that are becoming more complex are classified in line with the risks that they represent to the patient. For example, we're talking about bandages that act just beyond just being a mechanical barrier to promote wound healing or reduce infection. With this higher classification comes a higher safety and performance reliability via increased assessment requirements. So next slide, please. Devices used during the process of in vitro fertilization or assisted reproduction technologies will be classified as Class 3. However, in order to mitigate the risks that an increased regulatory burden would make these processes inaccessible for users due to the high costs associated with collection of clinical data or post-market surveillance. This rule will only apply to the riskiest devices and be limited to substance-based devices used in vitro. These devices will be devices used in direct contact with human embryos before implantation or administration into the body during the process of IVF or ART. And this includes products such as mineral oils and culture media used to separate embryos or nourish and feed these embryos after fertilization. As a result of these changes, these devices will be subject to more stringent conformity assessment and improved quality control. There will be increased post-market surveillance requirements for these devices, which aim to protect the health of vulnerable users, but also the long-term health of children born by ART. As a rapidly developing field, this is going to ensure that MHRA are in a position to support responsible innovation and provide safe access to the most state-of-the-art devices. Next slide, please. So we move now on to invasive devices. The MHRA will put in place stricter requirements for devices intended to administer medicinal products by inhalation, and this will be dependent upon the intended purpose of the device, but there will be between Class 2A and Class 2B. Stricter requirements will also be put in place around implantable devices, such as surgical mesh, total or partial joint replacements, spinal disc replacement implants, and implantable medical devices that contact the spinal column. These devices will be classified at the highest level, Class 3, in line with the risks that they represent to patients. But this will not include the ancillary components such as screws, wedges, plates, and instruments. These devices will be subject to more stringent conformity assessment procedures, and as such, the burden for clinical evidence will be higher, improving patient safety. The resulting increased burden for post-market surveillance will support responsible innovation as the complexity of these types of devices increases and will also improve responsiveness to public health threats. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we'll talk about the special rules. Now, the addition of several special rules will address the classification of new technologies, including nanomaterials. Having reviewed our position set out in the consultation, this rule will now align to Rule 19 of the EU MDR to support compliance. Classification will be dependent upon the potential for internal exposure levels, and products that incorporate or consist of a nanomaterial will be classified between Class 2A and 3. We will not be extending this rule to devices that generate nanomaterials at this time due to concerns around the practical implementation of this requirement, but we will consider further consultation in this area and are open to people's views on this topic. Medical devices that are composed of substances or combinations of substances that are intended to be introduced into the human body via a body orifice or applied to the skin and are absorbed by the human body will now be Class 2A to 3. And the classification rules will apply to these devices once they've been qualified as a medical device rather than as a medicinal product. For example, this includes products for oral administration that seek to treat conditions such as diarrhea or substance-based formulations for skin treatment. Next slide, please. So we'll touch on special rules for active therapeutic medical devices in this slide. So the classification of active therapeutic devices will also be covered within the special rules. Active therapeutic medical devices with an integrated or incorporated diagnostic function, which significantly determines patient management, will be Class 3. And for example, this includes automated external defibrillators that diagnose life-threatening arrhythmias, or closed-loop insulin delivery systems that continuously monitor glucose levels and can adjust insulin delivery accordingly. So these devices represent significant risk to patient safety as their failure can severely impact patient health or result in death. And the classification of these devices as Class 3 will ensure that the highest standards of safety are expected. The approved body will conduct a thorough examination of the device's design, manufacture, and performance in order to ensure that it meets the essential requirements. And it will be subject, or these devices will be subject to the highest level of post-market surveillance. So I will now pass to Paul Campbell, who will provide an update on the changes to the regulation of software as a medical device. Thank you.
Thanks again, Claire. Good morning, folks. So many will be aware that currently software often ends up not being qualified or classified as a medical device, or usually in the lower class of the classification system currently. So the intention from the consultation was clear to improve the classification rules for software and make it clearer what they are. And there's been a very clear declaration, apologies, that we intend to follow the IMDRF software guidance as the N12 document. Within that, there's a categorization, categories 1, 2, 3, and 4, and these categories you'll see are mapped up to the risk classes 1, 2A, 2B, and 3. So that's the intention, and it's split up into determining how serious or critical the condition is and whether it informs, drives, or treats or diagnoses patients. The intention alongside this classification is to follow the sort of related and consequential implementing rules and definitions that also align with this IMDRF document. So I'll pause at that and hand back to Claire, I believe. Joseph, sorry. Thank you.
No problem, Paul. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody again. I will be talking a little bit more about the IVD device classification set. So next slide, please. The current IVD regulations adopt the IVD directive classes of general class, self-test, and Annex 2 List A and List B IVD devices. We know that self-test and Annex 2 List A, List B devices must have a conformity certificate, and the general class can be self-declared. The majority of registered devices in the UK today are general class and therefore self-declared. The presently draft future classes will be risk-based, as you can see on the right side, with Class A devices being the lowest risk and Class D the highest risk. The Class A devices will continue to be self-declared by the manufacturer to conform with the future regulations, whilst Classes B, C, and D devices will be required to be conformity assessed by an approved body. These classes are based on the IMDRF N64 document, also known as the Principles of In Vitro Diagnostics Medical Device Classifications. The EU IVD regulations, IVDR, has adopted the principles with minor modifications. Next slide, please. The assignment of the class letters will be based on general implementation rules and classification rules. The future IVD classification rules will include 3 UK-specific additions to the IMDRF N64 rules. For IVD devices that monitor the infectious load of a life-threatening infectious disease, such as Ebola Zaire or Lassa virus, these devices will be Class D. As we experienced during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, highly transmissible and often fatal diseases need the higher level of a conformity assessment to be undertaken to ensure reliability of these IVD devices. We have also incorporated IVD devices that screen, detect, and diagnose neurodegenerative and cardiovascular diseases to be the future Class C. These diseases are areas that are evolving, and the devices that screen, detect, and diagnose for example, dementia and stroke, require conformity assessment to be risk proportionate to ensure device dependability. I will now talk about the key points of the general implementation rules. Next slide, please. The classes will be based on the device intended purpose and intended user. It will need to consider the impact of the results to the individual and or to public health. When an IVD device is used in combination with another device, like another IVD, but the device could be used separately, the individual classification rules separately will apply to each device. If more than one rule applies, the IVD device will be classed to a higher class. Certain devices will be required to be classified on their own right. These include accessories, including software accessories, as well as software which is independent of other devices. We've also considered companion diagnostic devices. All companion diagnostic devices will be classified on their own right. Certain devices are classified in the same class as the device that it is supplied with. These are software devices that drives or influences a device, calibrators, and controls. And now I will share the classification rules. Next slide, please. Classification rules are to be used with general implementation rules I've just shared. There are 7 rules that can be read on the screen right now. Each rule will be made up of sub-rules, which some are represented on the slide right now as bullet points. The classification rules start with Rule 1, and a series of sub-rules are to be eliminated to progress to the next rule. If the subsequent rule does not apply, the letter designated will be the class of the device with that rule. As you can see, with Rule 1, it would be Class D. Rule 1 includes the aforementioned UK-specific requirement for IVDs that monitor the infectious load of a life-threatening infectious disease. Rule 3 includes the UK-specific requirement for IVD devices that screen, detect, and diagnose neurodegenerative and cardiovascular diseases, as well as other diseases. Rule 6 is the catch-all rule, where IVD devices not covered in Rules 1 to 5 are to be Class B. Then Rule 7 is specifically for IVD devices that are controls without a quantitative or qualitative assigned value. These will be Class B. Please note Rule 4 is for self-test IVD devices, and these devices will be a future Class C, except, of course, for already established self-test devices, such as cholesterol tests, pregnancy tests, glucose tests, and all of these will be Class B. Remember, Class B and C devices will require to be conformity assessed by an approved body. Each class will consider individual risks and/or public health risk. Next slide, please. Let's start from the bottom of this slide on examples of each of these classes. So Class A devices will be general laboratory use devices, any instruments, any readers, and any analyzers, as well as receptacles and culture media. These devices have low public health risk and low individual risk. We move up to Class B. Devices will be devices with low public health risk and moderate individual risk, such as devices to detect CRP, or C-reactive proteins, H. pylori, and C. difficile. Let's move up again to Class C. Class C devices will be include devices with moderate public health risk and high individual risk, such as devices for self-testing that are not established, as I mentioned already. These can include self-tests for blood clotting, such as the use of PT-INR for thrombin international normalized ratio, medical software for high-resolution analysis of HLA sequencing data, and all genetic tests. The highest risk Class D, as you can see at the top of the slide, are devices with high public health risk and high individual risk. These will include devices that detect HIV, hepatitis B, C, and D, and all blood grouping products. As you can see, the general implementation rules and classification rules will determine the class of the IVD device. I will now give examples of where IVDs currently not in scope of the current UK medical device regulations will be made into scope on the future regulations. Next slide, please. The current medical device regulations were developed several decades ago. and technology has significantly advanced over that time. The future regulations will include many direct-to-consumer tests, such as tests for testosterone or prostate antigen tests. Many of these are currently available online or in retail stores today, and we are going to start thinking about how we regulate these moving forward in the future. Companion diagnostic devices are treated as general class today, and sometimes not even considered an IVD at all. In the future regulations, companion diagnostic devices must be classified using the classification rules I've just mentioned. And in the majority of cases, they'll be Class C, and they are to be named with a specific medicine in which the companion diagnostic device will be used with. Genetic tests and genetic testing will be explicitly in the scope of future regulations as Class C. And finally, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see wearables. These are wearables with a medical purpose, and the emphasis here is with a medical purpose, that perform a diagnostic function and will be included in the scope of the future IVD regulations. These include wearable devices that take samples on the surface of the skin, like on the surface of the body, like on the skin, to diagnose a physiological state like an abnormal sinus rhythm. Wellness products at the top of the screen will continue to be evaluated and monitored, and these devices will not be incorporated into the future medical devices regulation in the short term, but we are evaluating these more in the long term. These are a selection of examples from where the future IVD regulations will use the A to D classes, as well as the rules I've mentioned before. We're introducing the classes and rules so the future regulations are risk proportionate. Next slide, please. The rules are to give clarity to the device classifications that support the conformity assessment that's required. Also, these classes and rules align with the harmonized principles of the IAMDRF classification system. I trust this gives an overview of the future IVD classification system and certainly the inclusion of some devices to go into the scope of future regulations. So now we'll change from classification systems that Paul, as well as Claire and I have talked about, to now essential requirements. I'd like to introduce Jenny Keating, who is a medical device regulatory specialist, and Christina Margaretto, who is a diagnostics lead, to talk through the draft essential requirements. Jenny, over to you to talk through essential requirements. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Joseph. Yeah, so as Joseph said, in this section, we'll give an update on the essential requirements that will apply to manufacturers of medical devices in Great Britain. So the requirements will apply to all commercially manufactured devices, including custom-made devices, and also to those covered by the Health Institution exemption. So I'll cover general requirements and design and manufacture, and then hand over to my colleague Christina, who will cover labelling and instructions for use. And just to note, this will be a brief summary rather than a detailed overview of all the requirements. Okay, next slide, please. Great, so I'll start by setting out some of the existing regulatory context. So as previously mentioned, in Great Britain, medical devices are governed by the UK Medical Devices Regulations, which before leaving the EU transposed 3 directives covering medical devices, active implantables, and IVDs into domestic law. So therefore, our current regulations are based on 3 directives, and our essential requirements are found in Annex 1 to each of these directives. So manufacturers must consider the essential requirements when designing and developing medical devices and must demonstrate conformity with any that apply to their products. In terms of what they cover, the essential requirements are split into 3 areas. So firstly, there are general requirements which apply to all devices, and these include obligations around design safety, risk mitigation, and transport and storage. The second set of requirements cover design and construction. So for example, chemical, physical, and biological properties, infection and microbial contamination, and protection against radiation. A manufacturer will determine which of these obligations is relevant to their device. And finally, there's a set of requirements covering labelling and instructions for use. So the essential requirements ensure that the medical device is safe and meets its intended purpose. And importantly, devices can't be placed on the market or put into service unless they meet these requirements. So in the EU, as you'll be aware, the 3 directives have been replaced with regulations on medical devices and IVDs. And these EU regulations have a more stringent and comprehensive set of obligations, now referred to as the General Safety and Performance Requirements, or GSPRs. Next slide, please. So in terms of why we're changing the essential requirements, so as mentioned earlier, these are currently based on EU directives that were developed several decades ago, and there has been significant evolution in the medtech sector since that point. So we need to reflect technological progress and innovation, including advances in software and AI. There's also a need to keep pace with international regulators and frameworks, such as the EU and MHRA, which now have more extensive obligations than we have in GB. And our overarching aim is to deliver public and patient safety benefits by having a clearer and more comprehensive set of requirements in place for manufacturers. Okay, next slide, please. And just to summarise the key changes, so in the 2021 consultation, there was significant support for close alignment with the EU GSPRs, and we've taken that feedback on board and will align with the EU. The aim is to simplify obligations and processes for manufacturers and to avoid unnecessary duplication. And this should also minimise any divergence with the rules that apply in Northern Ireland, making it easier for manufacturers to access the whole UK market, which should deliver benefits in terms of continued safe supply of medical devices. And as set out in the government response to the consultation, we'll tailor the requirements so they're suitable for the GB context. And many of these changes will be simple modifications, for example, to change references to EU legislation and bodies to relevant UK ones. Okay, next slide, please. And this slide just includes a few examples of the modifications that I've just mentioned. So, for example, the EU GSPRs covering devices incorporating medicinal products and devices with a measuring function refer out to other pieces of EU legislation. So we therefore will need to change these references so that they refer to appropriate UK legislation. And for medical devices, the scope of the UK MDR won't include devices manufactured using non-viable derivatives of tissues or cells of human origin. So this will be different to the EU MDR. So it's not currently appropriate for us to reference the parts of the GSPRs that cover these products. And just to note that this is not intended to be an exhaustive list, but it's just to give some examples of the types of modifications that we'll need to make. Okay, so that concludes my section of the presentation. So I'll hand over to my colleague, Christina, who will cover labelling and instructions for use. Thank you.
Sorry, Christina, you're muted.
Oops, apologies. Thank you, Jenny, and good morning, everyone. My name is Cristina Margareto, and now we are going to talk about the information that needs to be provided with the device. So next slide, please. So first of all, what do we actually mean by information to be provided with the device? So by this, we mean labels, packaging, instructions for use. This also includes electronic instructions for use, and overall, any other information that needs to be provided with the device. So as part of the 2021 consultation, the government consulted on the possibility of increasing the requirements on the information that needs to be provided with the device. The rationale behind this was to bring more clarity to users by providing a more detailed information about the intended purpose of the device, but overall also about what is known about the device. And this enhanced information will ensure that the end user operates safely the device and that then the device performs as intended by the manufacturer. Next slide, please. So while some differences will be observed between the requirements for general or implantable medical devices and IVDs, most requirements will apply to all groups of devices. And also, while some of the requirements were previously in place and they have been enhanced, some others are completely new. So, for example, there has been a change in the relation of how people operate with their environment. So we see that technology frequently involved when using a medical device. Then manufacturers will need to ensure that they accommodate for the current technological behavior of users. Then if the manufacturer has a website, up-to-date information about the medical device will have to be present in the website in addition to the information that is provided by paper. Also, there will be specific requirements about the information that needs to be provided with any software element, whether this is software as an IVD or software which is classified as a standalone software as medical device. Some of the new requirements aim at helping to support manufacturers to achieve environmental sustainability. As such, manufacturers will be able, with some exceptions, to provide electronic IFUs instead of paper IFUs, but they will be required to have paper-based IFUs on request. And along the same lines, a change from the current requirement will be the removal of the need to provide an individual IFU with each device when more than one copy of that specific device will be supplied to the same end user. So in those cases, a single copy IFU could be provided if this is agreed with the end user. Next slide, please. So how some devices are operated has also changed in recent years, and we had seen an increase in lay user testing. So manufacturers need to ensure that the delivery format of the instructions for use is adequate to this end user. This will be true for all devices, but especially for those devices used by non-specialists outside traditional healthcare settings. For this reason, usability requirements will be more important than ever before. And the manufacturer will need to take into consideration the end user characteristics, such as, for example, technical knowledge, level of training, language consideration, and deliver the information about the device efficiently using supporting aids if it's necessary. The manufacturer will also need to provide comprehensive information regarding how to operate safely and effectively the device, how to interpret the results, and very importantly, when to seek medical advice. It will also need to ensure that the end user is aware of any warnings, limitations, contraindications, or precautions. Next slide, please. The information required to be provided related with the operability and the performance of the device will also increase. New measures will be introduced to guarantee that the user knows how to manipulate the device so it works as intended by the manufacturer. But it will be also a requirement to enhance the information currently provided about the performance characteristics of the device and other elements, such as, for example, storage or stability characteristics. So by this, users will have a better understanding of the technical characteristics of the device and any potential limitations. So manufacturers then will have to provide thorough information about the device methodology and also about the analytical and the performance profile of the device. Next slide, please. So increasing safety for users and patients is basically at the forefront of these new requirements. And several measures have been put in place in order to guarantee this safety. So the first, it is increasing traceability by introducing UDI identifications for each device. This measure will also place the United Kingdom in alignment with other regulatory regimes, and it will allow the international traceability of medical devices. The device must be provided with information that is human readable, but for those manufacturers that wish to introduce additional machine readable information, this will be also a possibility. And additionally, the new written note for end users to notify any serious incident with the device will increase user safety by bringing these events into the knowledge of the manufacturer, but also of the MHRA. Next slide, please. So until now, we have discussed requirements that apply to all different types of medical devices, but some of the future requirements are specific for general or implantable medical devices, but not for IVDs. So within those ones, we have the requirement for medical devices to provide information to the user or patient about the clinical benefits of the device. Also, we wanted to increase transparency and safety. So for those medical devices that are implanted or non-implanted but in contact with patients, manufacturers will have to provide biosafety information to users. So for example, if a device contains blood or plasma derivatives or substances of animal origin, this will need to be indicated. When devices contain certain substances about a defined concentration, this information also needs to be provided. So for example, any substances considered carcinogenic, mutagenic, or toxic to reproduction, which is what we call CMR substances, if they are present in a concentration which is above 0.1% weight by weight, this needs to be communicated to the user. The same will apply if the device contains substances that they are considered to be endocrine disruptors. So then for those devices that incorporate medicinal substances or substances intended to be placed inside the body or in contact with the skin, but that they can be absorbed, information about the overall qualitative and quantitative composition will also need to be provided. And this requirement will be extended to materials in the case of implantable devices. And finally, for all those situations that I just mentioned, the manufacturer is expected not only to provide biosafety information, but also any associated warnings, precautions, contraindications, or limitations associated with the device under those circumstances. Next slide, please. So as we just seen for medical devices, some requirements will be specific, but in this particular case, only for IVDs. So for example, to improve safety and traceability, devices classified as companion diagnostics will have to indicate the non-proprietary international name of the medicine or biological medicine associated with the use of the companion diagnostic. In the intended use, specifically for self-tests and all tests operated by lay users, need to have a clear intended use reflecting this situation and enhance information related to safe usage of the device. And as previously mentioned, more detailed information about how a device operates and its methodology will be required for all devices, but this area has been greatly expanded for IVDs. So detailed information about the characteristics of the device will be required. And this includes, for example, the principle and the methodology of the device, a thorough detail regarding analytical and clinical performance, and for example, all elements associated with the stability of the device. Also, if applicable, information about metrological traceability of values assigned to calibrators and control materials will have to be provided. And finally, IVDs could come associated with accessories or as part of a kit. So it will be a requirement to increase information provided for all the accessories or components that could be associated with the device. So now we have reached the end of this section. And we are going to move to the pre-selected questions that have been submitted by participants. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Eve that will moderate the Q&A section. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. Just as a pre-note, I've got a couple of screens running at the same time, so my gaze may wander. But our questions that we highlighted pre-session, will the MHRA align risk classification for software as a medical device and AI as a medical device to the EU MDR IMDRF to close the existing Class 1 loophole? So, as indicated in the government response to the 2021 public consultation on medical devices, it remains the government's intention to proceed with the proposal to amend the classification rules in UK medical device regulation to include the IMDRF software as a medical device. Right. The second question was, what is the rationale for the specific differences between EU GSPRs and UK essential requirements? Let me just... the essential requirements for Great Britain will closely align with the EU GSPRs. This was requested by respondents in the 2021 consultation, and we consider that it will streamline processes and avoid duplication for industry. However, we do recognise there is a need to tailor the GSPRs to make them appropriate to the GB context. For example, the EU GSPRs include references to EU bodies and legislation, and these are not relevant to GB. So some changes will be needed to make the GSPRs fit for purpose for GB. And the third question we have was, has the MHRA considered e-labelling for responsible person to allow stock to avoid packaging changes and or waste, and to avoid stocks carrying out-of-date information? Our answer to that is that the responsibility for EIFUs lies with the manufacturer, and this option has not yet been considered. Right, to move on then to the live questions that we've had. Right, so what I'm going to do is I will read out the question and then I will answer it. So the first question was, will the slide deck and recording be shared afterwards? Thank you. Unfortunately, we're unable to share the slide deck from this presentation as a deck. However, the webinar as a whole will be put on the gov.uk website in the coming weeks. So hopefully that will be helpful. When will the draft UK MDR draft be available? So the engagement sessions that we're currently holding, including this one, are aimed to give stakeholders across the country insight to the content of the updates to the UK MDR. The full draft text will be available upon publication to the WTO website, and I suspect there'll be quite a lot of fanfare around that when it happens. Right, how aligned with the definition, does fulfilling the EU MDR regulatory requirements sufficient to obtain UKCA certification, since UK regulations still bind to the previous directives? So the current UKCA regulations require manufacturers to adhere to the old EU Medical Device Directive and the IVD Directive. However, once the regulations have been updated, this will no longer be the case, and manufacturers will need to adhere to the new regulations. Right. How aligned with the definition of software be? How long, I guess, will the definition of software be in comparison to IMDRF terms? I'll freely admit this is not my area of expertise, but I believe our regulations will align with the essential requirements of the EU GSPRs and the classification, definitions and relevant implementing rules of IMDRF N12 document. Paul, do you want to come in with an additional comment?
Eva was going to come in, but I think you've covered it there. I think we feel that the definition is broad enough and is in alignment with the IMDRF definitions and implementing rules, and the intention there is so that it is aligned and it will cover where we need to cover software as a medical device. Thank you.
And whilst I have you there, Paul, there is another, oh, he's gone, but I'm going to bring him back.
That's good.
In the EU, there's another question which is very software focused. In the EU, the current challenge is software is often automatically classified as Class 2A. Will there be more flexibility within the UK MDR to differentiate?
Thanks very much for that question. It's a good question. We have indicated that we intend to follow the IMDRF classification, just reiterating that, which people will see is a 4-tier classification system from Class 1, 2A, 2B and 3. And that allows us to be proportionate with the risk level of the software or medical device in relation to the intended purpose. So there is an option for it to be a Class 1, 2A, 2B or 3 device, and that will be determined on the risk basis of the product. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul. Okay, are medical device classifications changing from 1, 2A, 2B and 3 to Class A, B, C and D? So no is the short answer. We'll be continuing to align to the current medical device classification categories as Jenny outlined previously in the presentation. The IVD classification will move to Class A, B, C and D in line with the EU. So I hope that answers your question. Are the classification rules for UK aligned with EU rules? Broadly speaking, I think it's safe to say yes. However, again, as we've said, we're an independent regulator. So if there is a case to be made for classification to be tweaked or altered in any way, then we will likely do that. I hope that answers your question. Right. Currently, it is possible in the UK to self-declare a new test to the UKCA market, apologies, according to the IVDD regs, pending the introduction of the new UK regs. Okay, I think what this is asking is it still possible to self-declare? And yes, the answer to that is yes. The current UK regs will continue, so that will be aligning, or that will be requiring adherence to the IVDD and the MDD until we introduce the updated medical device regulations, at which point we would be asking manufacturers to adhere to the updated regulations. Right. Under the future regulation, would Class A sterile devices need a limited conformity assessment for sterility like under IVDR? So what we intend is that Class A sterile IVD devices will be assessed through the classification rules. Conformity assessment by a UK approved body will be necessary. Joseph, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, please. Thanks so much for the question. Good question as well. So in the future classification rules with the letter grades, there is a two-part to Class A regular and Class A sterile. With Class A sterile, you will need to go through a conformity assessment. As we have seen in the EU, the conformity assessment will require a technical documentation, so an Annex 2, Annex 3 technical documentation, plus one of a QMS assessment or a production quality assurance assessment. I think it's at Annex 9 and Annex 11, respectively. So we would follow very similar approaches in the feature classifications, but there would be an A sterile, which would not be self-declared, but will require a conformity assessment by an approved body, as I mentioned already. Thanks, Eve. Thank
you, Joseph. Very comprehensive answer. Right, next question is, how is the new UK MDR supporting innovative devices? So as we previously mentioned, or as I think the government has been very clear to date, that the government as a whole is supportive of innovation, and the MHRA continues to work to understand how evidence can be generated in a proportionate way. The MHRA, we recently launched the Innovative Device Access Pathway Programme to accelerate the development of cost-effective medical devices and their integration into the UK market by providing an integrated and enhanced regulatory and access pathway to developers. So we are actively supporting innovation. As we mentioned, the pilot project is launched, and we have 8 candidates that have been chosen, and these will go forth, and we will obviously review how this project has worked. In addition, our aim is that our regulations will be agile, pragmatic, and will prioritise patient safety, again supporting innovation in the UK. Any expected timeline the new regulation will come into force? So as we said previously, we published the roadmap at the beginning of the year, and that has it has timelines on it. Now, I mean, we have to be realistic that there is going to be a general election in the next year, and that will obviously affect these timelines. However, we will be endeavouring to maintain these timelines as quickly as possible. I don't think there's any appetite for delay in introducing the medical device regulations across government. Do you plan to consolidate all SIs into one regulation? Having multiple SI does not seem like a good way to have consolidate regulation requirement. So the reason for splitting the regulation into a number of SI was that it is a very large piece of regulation, and we believe that splitting it into multiple SI gives us the opportunity to ensure that what we deliver is of high quality and is appropriate to the needs of the public. If we had kept it in one SI, it would have been very difficult to manage. But what I will say is we have the same teams working on all SI, and we have significant planning support to ensure that the SI are cohesive, that they deliver high quality and patient-focused regulations. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. It's a really good question. Okay, next question. How can stakeholders feed into the MHRA's efforts? I mean, honestly, you already are, by attending this webinar, by telling friends and family, or by letting colleagues know about it. As I said, it will be put up on the gov.uk website. You can, apologies, we have upcoming engagement sessions with stakeholders for each of the different parts of each SI. Now, unfortunately, it won't be possible to include everyone that might want to attend these sessions with each session, but what we would encourage you to do is maintain contact with the MHRA through our customer services portal. Maintain contact also with trade associations. We're working very closely with trade associations, with approved bodies, with healthcare providers and with patient advocate groups. So if you have specific issues or specific problems, we would encourage you to contact us or one of the other bodies through these methods. Where will UKCA mark be accepted, in the whole UK or only GB? This is not a decision that we can make. Currently, as it stands, the UKCA mark is accepted in Great Britain, and Northern Ireland continues to accept the CE mark. And unfortunately, we have no powers to change that. What are the current timelines for the UKCA requirement? Will the timeline change? Again, the timelines are outlined in the roadmap that we published. I would encourage everyone to review that roadmap, ensure this is our plan of action to get the updated medical device regulations into force. Will the timeline change? Again, what we have indicated on the roadmap is that there are certain pieces of work that will be subject to external forces. These are highlighted in sort of a yellow colour, and these are potentially subject to change. As I said, we will have a general election in the coming year, and that may change our timing somewhat. But from an MHRA perspective, we are planning and proceeding with the timeline that is outlined on the roadmap as published. Which MD class can use EIFU? Can device for lay users be supplied with EIFU? This is a question I'm not absolutely positive of the answer. Christina or Joseph, would either of you have an answer, or is that something we need to look at later? Christina.
Yes, hello. Well, our intention is to have international alignment in this topic, so it's going to be applicable for professional use.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right, it can be very difficult to navigate regulations split over several documents. Will there be a single document published by MHRA government with all the SI together? It's a really good question. So the very basic answer to this is yes, ultimately there will be. The medical device regulation will be updated to encompass all the changes that have been made. However, in the intervening period, I would suggest that referencing the gov.uk site, where we will be putting up guidance on all the new regulations, might be a good will be a good resource. And yes, that would be my suggestion. Right, okay. Will there be more webinars and announcements to keep industry updated with the developments of the new regulations? Yes, there will be. As I've mentioned previously, we have engagement sessions coming up with trade associations, with approved bodies, with healthcare providers and patient advocacy groups. Additionally, you can sign up for notifications to updates to the gov.uk site, and that will be, I think, probably where the majority of our announcements will come. Will there be a transition period, i.e. manufacturers who certify under UK MDR 2002 may have a grace period to comply with the new UK MDR? This is a really good question, and obviously very pertinent to industry. Yes, there will be. This was laid out in the government response to the 2021 consultation. So yes, we will be introducing a a transition period, and this will be outlined in the upcoming regulations. An earlier slide set out EU versus GB essential requirements. I missed whether these are intended to be points of divergence or to be addressed by GB. I'm wondering, Jenny, if I could get you in to answer this question.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. So the essential requirements will be amended or modified to, apologies, I've got an echo in the room. Excuse me 1 second.
While Jenny is moving, let's move to the next question. Thank you very much for this insightful webinar. You are so welcome. The aim of our group is to ensure that we share as much as possible publicly as early as possible. I missed whether these are intended to be points of, are you going to share the presentation slides? If not, where can we get the information on the new changes? As I mentioned previously, unfortunately, we're not in a position to be able to share the slides as a pack. However, the recording of this webinar will be going up on the gov.uk website in the coming weeks. So again, if you sign up to the alerts, you should get alerted when it comes up. And Jenny, let me move aside for you.
Yeah, apologies for that. There was a very bad echo in the call just now. So yes, so essentially we will be making modifications to the essential requirements of the EU GSPRs as they apply in GB. So this will be, for example, to modify references to EU legislation to refer to UK legislation, for example, to make them fit for purpose for the GB markets. So there will be points of divergence, but we will be addressing them in the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. It's a comprehensive answer. And I think on that note, we have reached the end of our defined session. I will pass back over to, apologies. Next steps, how we will involve you. So as you've seen from our roadmap published in January this year, the MHRA will be holding targeted stakeholder focus groups in the coming months. We are intending to hold further public consultation on upcoming regulation to enhance the detail towards the end of this year. And we will be actively seeking input on what it will mean for patient and patient groups, how it impacts to their lived experience, and bringing innovative medical devices to the UK. We thank you for your time today and hope you found the session informative. And I think that's the end of me. I need to hand over to one of our GoToWebinar people.
Yeah, thank you, Eve, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. So once you leave the webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation. We would appreciate it if you could complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email in the coming weeks with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of MHRA and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy the rest of your day.